Rearing of queen bees. For many years, the rearing of queen bees has occupied a key place in beekeeping. Not only the beekeeping institutes, but also many smaller beekeepers dedicate much of their work and time to this important task. Queen rearing can only be done successfully during the short period of the year when the beekeeping season reaches its peak of activity. Young queens of good origin and character are needed to form new colonies and fill winter losses. The breeding material for rearing good queens, the youngest day-old larvae, are obtained from a breeder colony. Not every beekeeper has a worthy breeder queen, but he can obtain breeding material from a beekeeping institute or from established bee breeders. The breeder colony must possess certain characteristics. It should be disinclined to swarm and have an above-average honey production potential. The bees should be gentle and not display running and bunching behavior during an inspection and show resistance to disease and parasites. The genetic endowment of the queen will therefore essentially determine the characters and quality of the progeny. The most important criterion for selection must be an above-average productivity of honey, as this factor determines the profitability of a beekeeping enterprise. The nursing colony, on the other hand, must be able to raise good queens from the breeding material introduced. It exerts no influence over the genetic character of the queen larvae it is made to foster. The nursing colony must be healthy, prolific and strong. Many bees crammed together in the smallest possible hive space is the recipe for good results when raising queens. In order to achieve the conditions, the nursing colony should have access to good pollen sources during the previous summer. When spring comes, a stimulating honey solution must be fed whenever outside nectar sources fail. All work involved must follow a timetable corresponding to the development cycle of queen bees. For grafting, the breeding material should be not older than 1.5 days. Only by divided brood care can the transfer of the started cells into another stock be effected after 24 hours. Cells are caged on the 6th or 12th day. On the 13th day, queens emerge from their cells. On the following day, mating nuclei must be formed. 3 days after that, at the earliest, mating nuclei can be sent to their mating apiaries. For precise planning, a strip with these fixed intervals for actions can be aligned with a corresponding calendar strip. Let us first turn to the work involved in preparing the breeding material. 4 or 5 days before our planned starting date for rearing queens, we remove a frame from the colony with the breeder queen. We replace it with a frame with pale comb, which had been used once only for rearing bees and which is still moist with honey after extraction. This comb quickly attracts the queen, and the beekeeper obtains many larvae of the same age. The frame is marked with a coloured drawing pin. On the starting date, the marked comb will contain young larvae of the right age, 1 to 1.5 days old. Perfect queens can only be reared from such larvae. Here we can see the larvae literally swimming in brood food. We protect the comb from direct sunlight and against drying by wrapping it in a moistened cloth. There are many methods of preparing the breeding material for introduction to the nursing colony. One of the more simple methods is the cutting of cells. With a knife dipped in hot water, an area of comb containing larvae of suitable age is cut from the frame. On one side of the comb, all cells are shortened by 1/3 of their length. This allows bees to enlarge the mouth of the cells and draw them out as queen cells. After this, the comb is divided first into cell strips and then into pieces of comb containing individual cells. The long reverse of the cells is nipped between the halves of a split cell holder. While the method of cutting cells makes wasteful use of precious breeding material, the grafting of larvae makes more economic use of the larvae. For this method, we need artificially produced cell cups. These we can easily make ourselves from beeswax. By dipping a cell mandrel of 9 mm size several times into a wax bath, held at a temperature of 65 to 70 degrees Celsius, a queen cell cup is formed at its tip. After cooling in water, the cell cup can be removed. The artificial cell cups are attached to cell holders by means of more wax, which is melted with a soldering iron. The appliance trade also offers a number of cell cups formed from plastic. The cell holders are usually attached to a cell bar by means of melted wax. We require good light, good eyesight, and a steady hand when we are grafting larvae. The young larvae are taken from their cells with a grafting tool, which is slipped under the center of the larva from the back, lifting it and transferring it. There are several methods of raising queen cells. Here we will show you the use of 3 well-known methods. For raising queen cells in a queenless colony, we need a healthy and strong colony as our nursing stock, provided with ample brood as well as nutrient. 9 days before starting, we place an additional queen excluder between the 2 stories and confine the queen to 1 hive body. 9 days later, at the start of breeding, all brood in the queenless part of the hive will be sealed. After the removal of the super and of the queen-right part, in the center of the hive chamber with the sealed brood, a gap is created. Next, we form a 3-frame nucleus consisting of the old queen, 2 combs of brood, together with the adhering bees, and fill the space with a frame of stores. This nucleus is taken to an out-apiary. Into the queenless part of the colony, we brush or shake all bees from the queen-right brood chamber and also the bees out of the honey super. The nursing colony is then covered. A queen excluder at the entrance prevents strange virgin queens from entering. Bees begin to assemble in the gap. We transfer the cell-rearing frame with 20 to 30 cells into it after the colony shows the typical behavior of queenlessness. Whenever the natural flows are lacking, honey solution must be fed. The operations of this method are now shown on the stand. The nursing stock is prepared 9 days before starting. First, we find the queen and hold her temporarily in a cage. Combs with open and recently capped brood, as well as combs with pollen and honey reserves, are transferred into the lower brood chamber. The upper brood chamber holds empty combs and emerging brood. A queen excluder is inserted between the 2 brood chambers to prevent the queen from having access to the lower chamber. We now release the queen into the upper brood chamber. A further queen excluder keeps the queen out of the super. After 9 days, all brood remaining in the lower brood chamber is sealed. After setting the upper chamber with the queen aside, we remove one outside comb from the lower brood chamber and shake all adhering bees back into the hive. In the center of the hive body, a gap is created. This gap will take the queen rearing frame with the grafts. Any natural queen cells must be removed. Returning to the queen-right part of the nursing stock, we remove the queen. It is transferred to a nucleus. The three-frame nucleus is formed from 2 frames of brood and 1 of food, together with all adhering bees. All other bees from the remaining frames are brushed into the nursing stock. Besides good food supply, overcrowding lots of bees into one hive body is the recipe for acceptance and for best nursing for our breeding material. So we have compressed the bees from several brood chambers into a single box. Surplus frames of brood are distributed among other colonies. A guard made from queen excluder material prevents other queens from gaining entrance. About 2 hours afterwards, the colony shows typical signs of queenlessness. This is the time to transfer the queen rearing frame with the grafts into the gap. Here the nurse bees provide the young larvae with large quantities of royal jelly. This phase of engorging is important for the full development of the growing queen larvae. Great care is needed when inspections are made to check acceptance and success. The queen cells are sealed 5 days after grafting. When using this method, the nursing stock will retain the sealed cells until they are ripe. The other 2 methods divide the tasks of acceptance and finishing between 2 different colonies. In order to use the swarm box method, we also begin by first selecting a strong, healthy colony. Into the swarm box, we shake young bees from 6 to 8 brood frames. Make sure that the queen remains in her colony. The bees should fill about 1/3 of the box. They are provided with 1 frame of pollen stores, 1 frame with water, and 1 unsealed frame of honey. Then the swarm box is covered and is left undisturbed. After a few hours, the bees deprived of their queen become restless. The batch of grafted cells can now be applied. The finishing of the cells is done by other strong colonies. Because we need many nurse bees, we raise frames with open brood into the super and leave a gap between them. That space we created in the brood chamber is filled with empty combs. "24 hours after grafting, 15 to 20 started cells are inserted into the gap between the brood. The cells remain in the finisher colony until they are ripe and require caging. Now the procedure in actual practice. The swarm box has a large screened floor which prevents the bees suffocating during confinement. Having moistened the sides of a funnel, we brush the young bees off several frames of brood. This creates a queenless and broodless shook swarm. After briefly thumping the swarm box hard on the ground, the frames with pollen, water and food are lowered carefully among the bees. The water frame is made by spraying water into an empty comb. A special crown board which can hold the grafted cell cups is used. The swarm box is left in a cool, dark place until the bees begin to show signs of queenlessness. The crown board can hold between 50 and 60 cell holders. In order to avoid drying out of larvae, the grafting should be done just before they are needed. The bees will quickly supply the larvae with lots of royal jelly. Cut cells can readily replace grafted cell cups. The swarm box is now left alone for an hour at least. Once cells have been accepted, the finishing is done by another strong colony. In order to preserve warmth, we place an insulating cover over the swarm box. Rearing queen cells by using starter and finisher colonies also requires a healthy, strong stock. 9 days before starting, a queen excluder is placed between the two brood chambers to confine the queen to a single hive body. 9 days later, all brood in the lower chamber will be sealed. This part of the hive will become the starter colony designed to accept the cells. Removing 2 frames from the hive, we create 2 gaps. The other frames only contain sealed brood as well as some stores. We put the queen, with 2 frames of brood and 1 of food, as well as all adhering bees, into a nucleus box. This nucleus is taken to an out-apiary. We now proceed to cram all bees from the other hive bodies, on the right, into the 1 brood box which will be our starter colony. The brood frames, especially all frames with open brood, are later given to the honey chamber of other colonies in the apiary. The starter colony is now closed up. The entrance is covered with a queen excluder. Bees will shortly be gathering in the empty spaces. When bees show signs of queenlessness, 2 frames with about 40 grafted queen cells are transferred. The stock must be fed if the flows of nectar are scant. After 24 hours, the cells are transferred into occupied supers of honey-producing colonies, the finishers. It is important that several hours before, frames with open brood have been transferred into the honey chamber. Now a gap is formed. The cell-rearing frame with the started cells is placed in position. A finisher colony should never be given more than 15 to 20 cells. The starter colony can now receive 2 more cell-rearing frames. Here the first manipulations for raising queen cells by the starter and finisher method have been performed. The super and the upper brood chamber with the queen have been lifted off and are on the right. We remove 2 frames with only small patches of brood from the lower brood chamber. This creates 2 gaps. A starter should still contain at least 6 frames of sealed brood. If not, we must add frames of sealed brood from other colonies. Moving to the queen-right brood chamber, we remove the queen, together with 3 frames and the adhering bees, and put them into a nucleus box. All bees are brushed from the other frames, and the frames are temporarily placed into an empty hive body. Later, we transfer the frames into occupied supers of other stocks. The starter colony should be overflowing with bees, because this method too gives best results when we crowd many bees into the smallest possible space. After we have covered the hive, we place a guard of queen excluder material over the entrance. This stops queens from gaining access. A few hours later, in the queenless starter colony, we can hear the loud buzzing of the orphan bees. Meanwhile, young nurse bees have gathered in the two gaps. Now is the time for giving the starter stock about 40 grafted cells. Of course, the breeding material can also be offered as cut or punched cells. After 24 hours, the queen cells have been started by the starter colony and can be exchanged for another batch. Carefully, we remove the rearing frame and check for acceptance. Bees crowding thickly around the cells is a first positive sign of good acceptance. Bees are carefully brushed aside with a goose wing. Accepted cells can be distinguished by their lighter coloring and their greater length. Queen cups which have not been accepted are short and their opening has been narrowed. First, the two rearing frames are placed into a carrying box. Later, the started cells can be transferred into the care of a queen-right finisher colony. Lengthy delays should be avoided during transportation. Two more rearing frames with fresh grafts are inserted into the gaps between frames. Because many young bees are emerging in the starter colony, we can use the stock for 6 to 8 batches at intervals of 24 hours. More batches are possible, but only if we constantly add more frames of sealed brood. Before queen cells are given to the finisher colony, they are checked once more. Each larva should swim in a generous supply of royal jelly. The task of finishing cells is done by any very strong and thriving colony. In order to make sure the larvae are supplied with the royal jelly which suits their age, the finisher colonies should have many nurse bees available in the supers. In order to lure the young bees into the supers, we remove at least 3 frames from the center of each super some hours beforehand. It is best if we leave frames with pollen and honey in place in order not to lose the impulse of nursing. But we remove empty honeycombs to create the necessary gaps. If all frames contain much honey, as can be seen in this case, even honeyed frames can be taken. During the following manipulations, we must make sure the queen cannot slip into the super. We select at least 2 frames with large patches of open brood. Here, many young bees are occupied in nursing the young larvae. The frames now are raised into the super together with all adhering bees, and we leave a gap of 1 frame between them. The gap created in the brood chamber is first filled with frames of empty comb before we replace the queen excluder and the super. We now transfer the cell rearing frame with the started cells into the gap between the brood. No finisher colony should receive more than 15 to 20 started cells, otherwise brood care will suffer. They remain in the finisher colony until shortly before emerging. Queen cells in the finisher are sealed on the 5th day after grafting. They have to be caged before emerging. This can be done on the 5th or 11th day after grafting, because then the cells are relatively robust so that they can be handled. If we miss the 2 dates and 1 virgin is allowed to emerge, the whole batch of cells will be destroyed by the firstborn. Before caging, the nursery cages must be prepared. Waxen or plastic cups are filled with honey. Access to food is vitally important for the emerging queens, as they may well starve. The cups are fastened with honey into the base of the cages. This standard cage is secured by a movable plastic cover on one side and by gauze on the other. The cages are placed facing opposite sides alternately into a nursery frame. This arrangement is best where many queens are allowed to emerge in a colony. Many beekeepers have replaced the wooden cages with hair curler cages of 18 to 20 millimeter diameter. The cages are supplied with a reserve of honey by twisting the closed end of the cage in finely crystallized honey. The hair curlers are held in holes drilled into wooden blocks. But let us go back to the standard cages. With a gentle twist, we remove each cell holder from the cell bar and insert it into the cage. Shaking and rapid movement must be avoided at all costs during this operation. Furthermore, it is important to keep the cells upright at all times. The completed nursery frame with the cages is carefully set aside. Of course, when using hair curler cages, they are treated in the same manner. When virgin queens are allowed to emerge in the colony, the nursery frame is returned to the same place where the cell-rearing frame had been. Because sealed cells only need 50 to 70% air humidity and temperatures of 35 degrees Celsius, they can easily be transferred into an incubator for their last phase of development. Besides, in such an incubator, all work of checking emergence involves very little effort. The young queen bites through the tip of the cell and emerges 12 days after grafting. Lower temperatures may cause a delay in emergence, while raised temperatures can cause early emergence. A large thorax is a sign of good conditions during the queen's growth and development. From the time of emergence onward, the incubator should be checked at least twice a day. Conversely, on emergence in the colony, a daily check is sufficient. The cells should be removed after the young queens have left them, because sometimes a virgin will re-enter her own cell after emergence and is not able to leave it again. Marking queens is best done with numbered plastic discs, available from the appliance trade. For individual markings, they can be bought in various shapes and in annually changing colors. For applying the marking, the queen is held gently between thumb and index finger, with the thorax being uppermost. Using a pinhead, we apply a small amount of glue to the center of the thorax, making sure none is in contact with the roots of the wings. After moistening the other end of the marking tool, we pick up the plastic disc and place it over the glue on the thorax. Next, we let the queen run free over our hand, examining her carefully to see that she has well-developed legs and wings. Once marked for life, she can easily be found in a strong colony, and her age can be recognized by the color. Finally, we put her back into her cage until we require her again. No later than 2 days after emergence, we should introduce the young queens to the bees of the little nuclei from which they are allowed to mate. The bees needed for forming the mating nuclei are obtained by dissolving the nursing colony. They can also be collected from other strong stocks by shaking a few brood frames. Here the nursing colony is dissolved. At first we remove the nursery frame with great care and brush all bees off with a goose wing. The frame is put aside for the time being. One cage with a young queen is removed and attached to a piece of wire. The cage is hung into the special hive body, which is used to hold the shook swarm. All bees of each frame are brushed into a funnel over the swarm collecting box. If the queens are to be sent to an approved mating station, we must have no drones among the worker bees, as they could adversely affect the desired mating results. A drone excluder holds back the drones, while all the young bees run into the darkness of the swarm box. Once inside, they gather around the caged queen and form a cluster. The last bees still clinging to the sides of the hive are also brushed into the funnel. During these manipulations, many of the old workers fly away to their old hive stand, and the population of the shook swarm consists of mainly young bees. The bees in the deep floorboard are also added. As a rule, it is possible to form 15 to 20 mini-nuclei from the bees of one nursing colony. The attached bees are also brushed into the funnel. Finally, the drones which have gathered at the face of the drone excluder are removed. The hive body holding the shook swarm is now closed up and removed from the site. Before the bees are taken to a cool, dark place, to remain there for a few hours or overnight, they are wetted with a fine water spray. While the shook swarm is clustering in the dark, we have time to prepare the mini-nukes. The insulated Kirchheiner mini-nuke with its multi-comb design has proven its worth for instrumental insemination, for use within the apiary or in local mating apiaries. Four top bars, each equipped with a starter strip of foundation, assist in the drawing of good comb. The food compartment is filled with goods candy made from icing sugar and honey. When all is ready, we spray water through a fine rose over the clustering bees. This prevents their flight and escape. The bees are scooped up with a ladle which has a capacity of about 1/4 liter. To facilitate work, it is best if 2 top bars are removed beforehand and laid aside before filling bees into the mating nuclei. With a jerk, the queen is flicked out of her cage to land on the bottom of the nucleus box. The moistened bees are ladled in at once, the 2 missing top bars are quickly returned, and the lid of the nucleus is placed on top. All work must proceed smoothly. One mini-nuke after the other is filled rapidly to accommodate all queens of the batch. The little colonies, now headed by virgin queens, can be compared, biologically speaking, with natural afterswarms, also called casts. In order to fuse the bees and queen into a unified colony, the entrance remains closed for 3 to 4 days. The mating nuclei are carried to a dark place which is not too cold. Temperatures in the shed or cellar should not be below 15 to 20 degrees Celsius. This encourages bees to draw wax and comb from the starter strips. During confinement, the nuclei should be adequately ventilated, and a small jet of water may have to be sprayed into the cavity occasionally. After the period of confinement, the mini-nukes are taken to the mating site and placed on a flat surface. The bees are released when all flying has stopped. When the queens are to be sent to offshore mating stations on islands, one-comb mini-nuclei are used. After adding a frame with a starter strip, the box is closed with a pane of glass. The perforated metal strip should slide smoothly in its groove, and it is secured with a drawing pin. The closure disc over the entrance is also tested. The food chamber is filled with candy made from icing sugar and honey. To avoid drying, the candy is covered with greaseproof paper. The passage between food chamber and the bees must remain open so that many bees have access to the stores. A further lump of candy is attached to the side wall opposite the entrance before the bees are added. This will provide food for rapid engorgement by all bees. Just as has been described before, the standard mini-nukes are filled with the bees of a shook swarm. Each mini-nuke should receive about 1/4 of a litre of bees. Immediately after filling, the pane of glass is put into position and is secured with the clip fastener. One shook swarm, as formed from a nursing stock, will provide enough bees to fill 15 to 20 standard mini-nukes. The boxes are placed upright for the introduction of the virgin queen. The bees can now form a wax-drawing cluster. One edge of the nuke having been raised by a wooden lathe, adequate ventilation is assured. The virgin queen is now wetted with lukewarm water. This slows down her movements among the bees in the nucleus. By opening the entrance disc, the queen is allowed to run into the interior. The breeder's record card contains all relevant information of the queen's pedigree. It is placed under the lid of the mini-nuke. Finally, we make sure that the queen is accepted by the bees. Having the right mixture and the right quantity of young bees is an important factor for success. The right mini-nuke contains too many bees. The central nucleus has too few. When forming a cluster, the bees should take up about half of the available space. In order to allow the bees to fuse and become a family unit, the standard mini-nukes, just as in the case of the Kirchhainer mating hive, must be taken to a cool room, or they are placed in a shaded, insulated shelter. If allowed to fly, the site of release must be far enough away from the original location. In order to prevent the queen's flight, the entrance disc is turned so that the small entrance hole allows workers only to fly from the nucleus. A A first check is made after 3 days. This interval is necessary for bees to form a new colony. Bees which had been allowed to fly seem to be less stressed and are more quiet than any which had been kept in total confinement. When the bees have drawn good worker comb, we can accept this as a first sign of success. We send only the nuclei with a fair-sized piece of comb to the offshore mating stations. When flight has stopped, we remove the mini-nukes from their shelter, close the entrance disc, and put them carefully into the special crates for transport. Each consignment must be accompanied by a certificate of health and an address for the return journey. Furthermore, each standard nucleus must carry the name and address of its sender. A sticky label requests all personnel on trains and ships to handle the consignment with great care. A dispatch note giving precise details of port of destination and of the island mating station must be attached. Mating stations with guaranteed isolation can be found on all offshore islands along the North German coast. The sea forms a natural water barrier which prevents drones from flying in from the mainland. Many consignments from all over Germany are sent annually to the islands. Here, on the island of Langeoog, they are taken by horse and cart to the mating station amongst the dunes. A warden is in charge of each mating station. He collects the consignments at the station, checks certificates of health, looks after the mating nuclei on the island, and returns the consignment to its respective owner. The warden of the mating station waits until all flying has stopped for the day. He then checks each nuke once more that all is well, that no drones are present among the bees, and that ample food is left. He turns the entrance disc until the large opening permits flight, and lowers the mini-nuke into its special insulated shelter. He then makes sure that bees can pass through the passage and into the open. The drone parent colonies on the mating station have been selected according to severe criteria. One drone colony must be provided for every 25 to 50 virgin queens currently in the mating station. Special measures ensure the presence of strong, healthy drones. Nubile queens mate with about 8 to 12 drones when air temperatures are above 20 degrees Celsius. A few days later, they begin to lay eggs in the comb of the nucleus. The warden checks the small mating nukes weekly after all flying has stopped in the mating station. Colonies which show worker brood are collected for dispatch to their owners. In this mini nuke we can see a patch of brood in all stages of development. The flat cappings over brood are proof that the queen has mated and is producing worker brood. The bees of this mini nuke have absconded and have abandoned the comb structure. This colony has lost its queen and has started queen cells. The domed cappings show that drones are being reared. Here, worker bees have started to lay several eggs into each cell. Only drones can develop from such eggs. Colonies with laying queens are returned to their owner as soon as possible. The entrance holes of the shelters are closed at once. The warden enters all observations such as condition of colonies, start of egg laying or reasons for loss into the record book of the mating station. The Queen's record card, which accompanies the Queen for life, is filled in and signed. Start of egg laying, name of mating station and parentage of drone parent colonies are entered. On arrival, the breeder quickly supplies the bees with some water. The condition of the bees is checked and the presence of the queen established. Queen-right nuclei are allowed to fly through the small hole of the entrance disc. Queen-less nukes are dissolved. Queens should not remain in the standard nuclei for too long, as the brood nest area is too small to keep them productive. When she is required for introduction, the queen is carefully removed from the little colony. For safety reasons, this work is best done in a closed room. The young queen is held in a cage without any worker bees. Introducing the queen via a shook swarm gives the best guarantee of acceptance. A shook swarm is easily formed by brushing the bees off several frames which are taken from strong colonies. The frames with bees may be removed from supers or from brood boxes. Under no circumstances should a queen be taken by mistake. In order to create a shook swarm strong enough to develop into a stock which is able to winter, the bees should weigh between 1.5 and 2 kilograms, depending on the time of the year. When enough bees have been collected, we thump the swarm box on the ground, quickly remove the funnel and put on the cover. A short while later, the swarm box is set on the ground once more. Now the caged queen is added without losing bees. Sugar syrup is fed later. Placed in a cool, dark position, the bees will form a genuine swarm cluster within the next 24 hours. Towards evening of the following day, the bees are hived just like a natural swarm. It is best to wet the bees with a spray of water. When working with multiple story hives, the bees can be shaken into the deep underfloor cavity of the hive. A brood box is added containing either frames with comb or foundation. A feeder with sugar syrup is placed on top to provide food for the next few days. The queen is now transferred into an introducing cage in which the open end has been closed with candy. The hive is closed up and remains undisturbed for several days. A check to see that the colony is queen-right is made after 9 days at the earliest. Here we can see that the young queen has been accepted and has laid out a large brood nest. The first brood is already sealed and shows a good worker pattern throughout. This concludes the operations of queen rearing. By using queens of good pedigree, the colonies are rejuvenated and the genetic material is improved. Selective breeding is therefore essential to good apiary management.